In the bustling chaos in the city of Mary, in the roar of moving cars and screaming neighbors, there was a home overseeing it all that was prone to celebration. And especially today, as Ms. Brightside, the owner of the apartment, was now celebrating her new engagement. After the announcement party, when it was just her and her future bridesmaids, the bride-to-be went missing for a long period of time. After entering her room, the maid of honor, Angela, decided to go look for her. And as she told police, that was where she found her. Constable Jones and Dr. Locke arrived at the scene a few minutes later and examined the body. Mrs. Brightside had a few weird physical traits. Her body was a bit sweaty and bloated, which made sense considering the party. Despite this being a major problem in the socialite world, there was no trace of any substance of any kind in her system. The autopsy report shows that the cause of death was anaphylaxis, caused by a peanut allergy, which was odd because, as the maid of honor put it,
"That girl, she was more afraid of accidentally eating peanuts than the actual symptoms. She always used every precaution to make sure that peanuts stayed away at least 100 kilometers away from her."
And based on what Constable Jones could see, this was completely accurate. Miss Brightside made sure that all her meals were tested and ran her kitchen like a dictator, just to make sure that no peanuts would ever come close to her. Which begs the question, how did this happen? Miss Brightside possessed many personal chefs. Some were the best chefs in the country, as well as the best helpers to prep the meals as quickly as possible. In fact, she had her own head chef, who was second in command in the kitchen, right after her of course, Chef Vel. Chef Vel is a interesting man. He seemed to be bitter towards her, due to some disagreement that occurred, which cost him an opportunity to move on to better things, something she sabotaged to keep him in her servitude. This, combined with the fact that he would know if peanuts ended up in her food, made him a prime suspect. During the interview, the chef was nervous, fidgety, and hyperventilating, a telltale sign of guilt of some sort. The problem was there was no specific way to prove that he tried to poison her food. Seeing no other option, Jones chose, as she put it,
"If we are to solve this riddle, we need to go back to the scene of the crime, the dinner party."
That party is the only place where she could have been poisoned. Jones would need to cross-examine testimonies of everyone there that night to see if she could find, well, anything. There was a large array of people at the celebration, including many who knew the people of the hour, Miss Brightside and her fiancé, Andrew. And there were others who were just there for the social gathering of some of the most eccentric and wealthy socialites in the city of Mary. They, for the most part, held similar accounts. The party began at 9 p.m. Many who arrived early observed that the groom had simply not shown up yet at his own party. Oddly enough, Miss Brightside didn't seem to mind that much. As one person commented to Jones,
"Miss Brightside was busy doing two things, mingling with her guests and speaking with her staff to make sure that everything was in complete order."
Especially at the head maid, Mr. Cole. At 9:25 p.m., the guests could choose from a large array of dishes found from all across the world. Some delicacies were tailor-made for them and were handed out by wandering servants. At 10 p.m., Andrew finally arrives at his own party, with his best friends all around him. It is still unclear what he was doing beforehand. Most, if not all, testimonies reflect the same sentiment mentioned before. Mrs. Brightside didn't seem to mind his tardiness, and in fact, she welcomed him warmly. At 10:20 p.m., the last invitees made it. As Brightside's mother put it,
"That girl's bridesmaids and her maid of honor, Angela, also arrived late to the party, but they had a reason. They were bringing the surprise cake to the celebration. My daughter didn't really seem interested in the cake, as she didn't really know what was inside. That girl was always a control freak."
Around 10:30 p.m., Andrew and Angela both disappeared. Many believe they were planning a surprise for Brightside together. They both returned to the party at 10:45 p.m. At 10:50 p.m., it was time to cut the cake. Brightside, wanting to take no risk, went to go get her allergy shot and asked Mr. Cole to help her apply it. At 11 p.m., the cake was cut and everyone enjoyed it. At 11:30 p.m., at the end of the evening, everyone took their gift iPad and left, except for Andrew and the bridesmaids. During that time, there was a discussion between the couple. One of the bridesmaids said
there was an argument where he was trying to make her take something and she didn't want to. In the end, she refused and asked him to leave.
At around midnight, with only Brightside and the bridesmaids left, they all tried to have a small celebration of their own. Eventually, Brightside went to go get something and never came back. That was when Angela found her. The constable realized that there was a lot of the story she was still missing, so she tried to tie up loose ends. First thing in the morning, she decided to go speak to the people who were present all night, and yet their perspectives were left unrecorded. The staff all had the same thing to say. They all just served the others faithfully to impress their boss, and yet they all secretly felt a bit of anger towards her. All except a few who felt like they owed her, like Mr. Cole. The dishes served were in abundance, and there was enough food to serve 10 other parties. But as a rule, they weren't allowed to eat any of the food. During their very short breaks, they simply ate whatever they brought from home or whatever the chef made for them in their spare time. Eventually, she decided to go speak to the one person she wished to speak to the most, her fiancé. During their discussion, he stated that,
I was trying to help her, as she seemed a bit sick,
referring to the couple's argument before he left. When asked about where he and Angela went, he said that he did not really remember that encounter. There was a level of nervousness in his voice and in his demeanor. He was definitely stressed about something. However, her major breakthrough moment came when she examined the cake. The remains of the cake seemed to have traces of peanuts. When trying to connect the dots, some hypotheses come to mind immediately. The potential culprit would need to make her eat peanuts without her noticing. This may seem impossible at first, considering her ultimately justified paranoia, but there are a few ways this could actually happen. Perhaps someone fed her something she wasn't aware contained peanuts. On that front, the best theory so far is the cake, as it contains traces of peanuts. Perhaps someone put it in to trick her. Moreover, several people that night were hiding something. For example, Andrew. Actions such as arriving late and disappearing randomly made him seem untrustworthy. Angela is also suspicious, but less likely, as she stayed after the party and was the one who found the body. If she did commit this crime, why would she stay longer? The chef is also very two-faced, as he very publicly holds a grudge against her. To be fair, almost everyone else in her staff seems to hold the same grudge. Well, except for Mr. Cole. All these seem to be random facts, but when you put them in the right places, it creates a clear picture, which Jones completed in a few days. Let's begin with what we do know, the affairs. It is most likely that Andrew and Angela were seeing each other in secret. But this betrayal was most likely not a surprise to Ms. Brightside. Her behavior towards him points to the fact that she was already aware of the two of them and seemed to be emotionally disconnected from him. And in her grief, she found comfort in someone else, Mr. Cole. One detail that really bugged Mrs. Jones was that Brightside said she was going to get allergy medication for the cake. However, the autopsy report clearly shows that she didn't consume any substance whatsoever. If she lied, then what was she up to? Well, Jones believes she was having an affair with Mr. Cole, and this encounter was spun from anger due to the other adulterer's behavior that same night. You may be asking, why is any of this important? Well, first, let's answer another question. When was Brightside poisoned? Well, if Andrew is to be believed, she showed signs of sickness after the party. Therefore, before then. This does bring credence to the cake theory. That being said, one thing that is worth taking into account is that peanut residue on the cake doesn't mean that the substance was on the cake from the start. In other words, it is possible that the peanut residue didn't go from the cake into her system, but from her system into the cake. For example, if she already had traces of peanuts in her mouth and used the same knife and fork to cut the cake several times, then she would have been the one who put peanut residue on her surprise cake. If this is true, this means she was poisoned well before this moment. But when could this have happened? She was so precautious to her own food. That is when Jones remembered that there are more than one way to get an allergic reaction. There is the main way of eating, but there is also another more rare way of transmitting it, during moments of romantic intimacy with a partner, i.e. Mr. Cole. Mr. Cole intentionally ate peanuts so he could transfer it to Ms. Brightside and kill her. The very next day, Mr. Cole was arrested, and when interviewed, he said,
"I never poisoned her. I loved her. I would never hurt her. There has been some kind of mistake."
You know, he isn't wrong about some things. What happened that night was a web of crescendoing mistakes which led to Mrs. Brightside's death. There are many things that still remain unclear about this case. But one thing is for sure, Mr. Cole poisoned Mrs. Brightside. I mean, he had to. Unless he's implying that someone else fed him the food. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next case. Peace.